Thank you everybody for watching the film Hotel Rwanda. My name is Claude Gatebuke, and I want to start first with expressing our gratitude to AFI for screening this film. This film is screened in partnership with ADNA, which is Advocacy Network for Africa, which brings together over 200 advocacy organizations in the US advocating on various issues on the African continent. The organization that I belong to is the African Great Lakes Action Network, or AGLAN. And I am also a survivor of the genocide that you just saw depicted in the film Hotel Rwanda. I was fortunate to survive this genocide and the war in Rwanda, including bombing campaigns and shootings like tropical storms, but also at one point during the genocide being ordered to dig my own grave. During this time, I was made to dig my own grave at one point with my mother. Thankfully, someone intervened. One of the things that happened constantly during this genocide was being sheltered. I was sheltered in multiple households during the genocide and during this war, which is the great deed that Paul Rusesabagina, who is the real life hero depicted in this film, did for over 1,200 people in Rwanda. That's a lot of people. It was very dangerous at the time to actually shelter anybody. So I'm grateful to Paul Rusesabagina and to thousands and thousands of other people who sheltered many who survived this genocide. And today I am excited and elated to be presenting our moderator for this very esteemed panel. But my excitement is also is sad because we're talking about Paul Rusesabagina and what has happened to him, but I'm gonna leave it to the panel to speak on it because we have a very esteemed panel that can speak on it and the circumstances that he's under today. Our moderator today is Michaela Wrong, who is a British journalist and author who spent 6 years as a foreign correspondent covering events across the African continent for Reuters, the BBC, and the Financial Times in East, West, and Central Africa. And East and Central Africa is the region of Africa that Rwanda belongs to. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Michaela Wrong to get us going with this very esteemed panel. Michaela, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Claude, and thank you for inviting me. I'll just run through who we're going to be talking to today. We're going to kick off with Kia Pearson, who was the screenwriter on the Hotel Rwanda film, which you'll all have just seen, which was directed by Terry George and starred Don Cheadle and Sophie Okonedo. We're also going to be talking to Judy Reaver, who is a Canadian journalist and author who's brought out a book that has got a lot of people talking in the African and Rwandan circles, In Praise of Blood. It came out in 2018. It's a critique of the RPF and a very detailed look at its human rights record. It's just come out last year in French. And then we'll also be speaking to Karine Kanimba, who is, of course, Paul Rusesabagina's daughter, and she's going to update us on his conditions and the problems in trying to get him legal representation. So just to slightly talk about my own interest in this, this film, the screening, I have a book coming out next year called Do Not Disturb. Sorry, next year. I have a book coming out in 2 months' time called Do Not Disturb. And it really, it's an examination of the lengths to which the Rwandan regime will go to target critics abroad and to silence criticism and to reshape the narrative in the form that it wants the narrative to take. So the Rusesabagina case falls into that context of extraordinary lengths to which this government will go you know, a very carefully organized operation involving lots of moving parts, which surprisingly succeeded, and has now got Paul Rusesabagina in its grip in Kigali. So I just thought we could talk with Kia. Kia, maybe if you could talk us a bit through the making of Hotel Rwanda, which of course, you know, brought Paul Rusesabagina's work at the hotel to worldwide attention. You brought Hollywood into the frame. So how did you first hear about the story?
You know, I followed the Rwandan genocide when it happened. I was reading about it constantly in the New York Times, keeping tabs on it. And then it just kind of fell out of the news cycle. And I never knew quite how it resolved or why it exactly started. And I had a close friend that I went to college with who, after we graduated, moved to Africa, married a French woman and lived in various places, but was in Tanzania at the time of the genocide. And he heard there was a Radio France International reporter in the hotel who was actually broadcasting live every day from the hotel. And you could get daily updates on what was going on. And he was actually the real reason why the RPF stormed the hotel at the very end of the movie, wanting to kill everyone, because he had announced over the radio that the Hutus were losing and that RPF was winning, and it was only a matter of time before the RPF took over, and that was enough to incite the genocidaires to storm the hotel. They were actually looking to kill him. So he was listening to this broadcast daily, and you know, several years after the genocide, he came back to the States. He visited me in Brooklyn, where I was just graduated from film school. I was, you know, living the life of a struggling artist, editing, and he told me about the story of Paul and the hotel. And I was raised by very activist parents. And I immediately jumped at this. It just made sense to me. And what really grabbed me was, here was the story of one man who made a difference when the whole world literally turned their back on the genocide. And I really thought that, yeah.
Sorry, no, I just wanted to know how you then went about researching and fact-checking the film.
Yeah, so after he told me about this, my first call was to the Rwandan embassy. The lady who picked up, I said, I'm looking for Paul Rusesabagina. She said, you know, why do you want to speak to him? And I explained to her, you know, I wanted to know what happened at the Milk Colleen. And she said, well, I'm a survivor from the hotel. So I went down to DC. I was living in New York the next day, spent an evening with her, bought her dinner. She didn't touch her food at all. And she told me her story of how she got to the, finally got to the hotel and found safety there. It was completely harrowing. It was terrible. And after that, I felt committed to do it. So I started to contact everyone that I could. I spoke to a number of reporters who were in the hotel very briefly in the beginning of the genocide. I spoke to Pierre Prosper, who was the lead prosecutor at the Arusha Accords, and probably the most helpful person who wrote the kind of definitive book on it was Alison Desforges, who has since passed, but she wrote, she worked for Human Rights Watch. And she literally understood what happened in every you know, township or every town. And that's how I started to research it. It was through Allison that I got Paul's number. I kept trying to find Paul and I couldn't find him. So I literally called him after I spoke to Allison. And, you know, it was amazing after trying to find this man for so long. You know, he answers and he's driving a cab and he's in Brussels, and he's like, I got to pull off the side of the road. And I explained to him who I was. And at that time I was, you know, just kind of a kid with a backpack who had an interest in what happened there and was very passionate about it. And we talked a number of times on the phone. I was, somewhat broke at the time, and my girlfriend gave me her frequent flyer miles so I could go to Belgium and interview Paul. Then I went to Rwanda and spent several weeks there, did hundreds of hours of interviews, then came back to Belgium, talked to Paul some more, and then continued a dialogue with Paul on and off, and with Alison Desforges about what I understood and about what the story was. So that was 2 years by myself, and I wrote the script, and then I got it to Terry George.
Yeah, and you must be aware that, since the film came out, and there's been some controversy about some of the, the way in which the situation is portrayed and the role played by Paul Rusesabagina, and some of the people who originally sort of gave testimony have then retracted their testimony. Have you got involved at all in following those stories of witnesses who are saying different things now from what was said at the time?
I have followed it. I have tried to stay out of getting involved in it. It's a sticky subject, and my personal experience and my personal feeling was, after doing as much research as I did and talking to everyone that I did, and especially Alison Desforges, we got it right. I think a lot of it is motivated by Paul's falling out with Kagame, because they took the film down to Rwanda and screened it down there. Kagame loved it. Paul was praised. And then it was only after Paul started to have these differences with Kagame and actually spoke out saying, there needs to be more of a democratic process in Rwanda, that these stories started to appear. I think everyone is well aware of propaganda and how you can, we've gotten to experience that in the States, with spreading false, misinformation and getting other people to, perpetuate it. And I'd just like to say that, I'm sure you as panelists understand this, but to have a falling out with Paul Kagame and not do what he wants and not speak out against him. And I know one of the first people to kind of denounce him was someone that he was very close to, who was actually in the film. We had a character based off of her. So they're very thorough in discrediting someone when they want to go after them, and they get their closest friends to do it.
Yes, I wondered if I could ask Judy to comment a bit on that. So we've been talking about President Paul Kagame, and it seems that Paul Rusesabagina did become a bit of a bugbear. And his foundation that he set up after going into exile, which was very active. And I just wondered, Judy, you've got a perspective on how the government and the regime did regard the foundation and Paul's work once he left Rwanda.
Well, I think there are very compelling reasons why Paul Rusesabagina has become a leading target of the regime. And I come to that assessment because of the lengthy research I've done over many years, which has examined the RPF's role, actions during the genocide. And you have to understand that Kagame and the RPF's core legitimacy is derived from the official genocide narrative, which essentially states that Kagame stopped the genocide. Okay, so his RPF.
Kagame and the Rwandan Patriotic Front.
Exactly.
Kagame and the Rwandan Patriotic. Yeah.
Yes, and so the RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, is seen as the good guys. And so one of the reasons, I think the most compelling reason that I believe that Paul is a target is because after his book came out, he decided to break the code of silence around the official genocide narrative. And that was about 2007. And what he did was contact the UN tribunal, urging UN officials to investigate RPF crimes committed during the genocide, but not only during the genocide, but for the entire year, because the ICTR, the UN Tribunal's mandate, is to investigate and prosecute the crimes in 1994, before, during, and after the genocide. And so it's very dangerous for witnesses, contextual or direct witnesses of RPF crimes, to come forward on the record and make declarations publicly, or even give testimony to the tribunal. So very briefly, my book re-examines the genocide in that I look at the RPF role in the violence. My book provides evidence that the RPF unleashed the genocide by shooting down the presidential plane carrying the Hutu presidents, President Habyarimana. And that act unleashed or sparked the genocide against Tutsis. And so,
of course, that's a claim that the government has always, adamantly denied, and said that it was Hutu extremists who were sort of not accepting the outcome of these peace deals that had been negotiated in Arusha. So that's a very, very sensitive point, isn't it, for the RPF?
Yes. But the most compelling evidence, and even some of the most senior lawyers at the tribunal, prosecutors, not defense lawyers, lawyers who worked at the office of the prosecutor, will admit that the evidence was there, that everyone knew that Kagame and the RPF shot down that plane. Okay, so in addition, my book looks at how, and this is very pertinent to Paul's story and what he was saying in the mid-2000s. My book provides evidence that the RPF and Kagame's troops and intelligence agents carried out highly organized, systematic, large-scale massacres against Hutu civilians in RPF-controlled zones. And the RPF infiltrated, and this is a shocking aspect of my research, infiltrated Hutu militia and fueled the genocide against Tutsis. So RPF commandos disguised as Hutu militia infiltrated those groups and directly participated in the killings. And in fact, this is a taboo subject. It's like talking about incest in one's family. It's the big dark secret. And Paul Rusesabagina was ready to collect and provide some evidence of the RPF killing Hutus in RPF zones, but he even mentioned this phenomenon in an interview. And it's very, very dangerous. And so this kind of truth-telling, Paul Rusesabagina, when I said he mentioned this, he mentioned it in a very veiled way because it's dangerous to do so. And so the kind of truth-telling that he was poised to do or started to do punctures and deflates the official narrative on which Kagame's legitimacy is based. And so I look at the chronology, and you see that the ratcheting up of false accusations against Paul Rusesabagina coincides with this time. So he began to be accused of supporting terrorism in Congo, of supporting the FDLR, which are Hutu combatants in the Congo. And so you see the chronology. And so what I'm saying is Paul Rusesabagina started to strip Kagame of his emperor's clothes, so to say.
I'd like to bring in Corinne at this point and just ask you, as Paul's daughter, I mean, he must have been aware of what dangerous territory he was in airing these concerns, airing these suspicions, sort of challenging the official version in this way. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, thank you for that question. He was aware of the dangers, and the thing that's important to note about him is that he's never shied away from speaking truth to power, from being honest and challenging the politicians or the authorities when he saw injustice. And that goes back before 1994. He used to actually publicly disagree with President Habyarimana. He refused at one of the events that was organized at the Diplomat Hotel in Rwanda to wear a pin of President Habyarimana because he did not agree with him. And subsequently, in the hotel, the Mirkoline, during the genocide, he saw injustice and he did not stand by and let people get killed. He, in fact, protected them. After the genocide, he continued to speak up every time he saw injustice, not only publicly, but also at home. People would come to him and ask for help, and he always did. So he knew of the dangers, he knew of the truth of what the RPF has done, and he after the Hotel Rwanda was released and that he was able to get an international platform, he used that platform to raise more attention on the injustice going on in Rwanda, on the human rights abuses going on daily in Rwanda. So he just used this platform as any person who would have had that international attention should have and would have used it.
Can I ask you, because I remember seeing the news of your father's rendition and being really surprised by it, and watching all these reports, all the speculation coming in, because he was snatched apparently in Dubai, and then there are photographs of him coming off the aeroplane in Kigali in handcuffs, and to be honest, we're still not that clear on how he got from Dubai to what was a rather expensive jet landing in Kigali. You don't have any clarity on the circumstances of his rendition, do you?
So we know for a fact that he was not going to Rwanda. I mean, like Judy said pretty well, for many years he was, Paul Kagame went after him, trying to silence him, trying to kill him. So we know for a fact that Rwanda was not his destination. And we lost contact with him from the 27th of August until when they showed him around in the media on the 31st of August. And so those days, and that never goes that long without being in touch with us. And so we know it was a kidnapping, and we know that the president, Paul Kagame, usually flies in that private jet. And so there's all the clues are pointing towards who is responsible for the kidnapping. But when the Rwandan government continues to claim that he brought himself to Rwanda, that he went voluntarily, I mean, that's a joke, and it's not true, period.
And when this news was breaking, I remember seeing on Twitter that immediately people who are defenders and admirers of the Kigali government immediately were showing an old video as a kind of smoking gun. This is why he was arrested. This is why he's being charged with terrorism. And it was an interview with your father in which he's sort of exhorting young Rwandans to sort of join a movement that is going to sort of oppose the Rwandan government. And that was like, here's the proof that he's a terrorist. And I'm guessing that will come up during the trial. And I was just wondering, I mean, what's the background to that video, as far as you know?
Yeah, so first off, my father is innocent of those terrorism charges. That is, as we mentioned earlier, Kagame has multiple times tried to bring false charges against him, and the US refused to accept them in the past, and the Belgian authorities have refused to accept them because they never had any legitimate evidence. The video that they are sharing around every time that somebody mentions that my father is innocent is completely taken out of context. So in the week right before that video was filmed, he and the movement, the MRCD, which stands for the Movement for Rwandan Democratic Change, which is the movement, the coalition that he was part of, had publicly stated that they were not responsible for the attacks. They had publicly stated that that this was actually led by their FLN, the FLN members of the MRCD coalition were actually there to protect and defend civilians from attacks launched by the Rwandan army. So launched through a false flag operation. So we know that the Rwandan government has done this multiple times in the past. In the past, is that they launch false flags operation in order to blame other people that they're trying to take down. And given that my father was for many years, wanted by Paul Kagame for speaking out and for being brave enough to call out all the human rights abuses, he needed to take him down. And so he saw that as an opportunity, and that one video of 10 seconds as an opportunity to say that my father is responsible for terrorism. And another thing I'd add to this is that my father for over 20 years has spoken about truth, about dialogue, about reconciliation, and he's always stood up for nonviolence. And so in trying to somehow all of a sudden paint him as a terrorist, as a murderer, as an arsonist, all these crazy charges are not only completely ludicrous, but also just completely opposite of reality. So he's a good person who has always stood up to the dictator, and the dictator saw an opportunity to kidnap a humanitarian.
Well, can you tell us about the conditions in which he's being held and preparing for his trial? Because I gather that although he's got access to lawyers, he hasn't got access to the lawyers that he himself has chosen and would have liked to represent him.
Yeah, so this actually really fits into the argument as to why he's innocent. First of all, they kidnapped him, which is without any legal extradition and without an international arrest warrant. And now they're prohibiting him from having access to his lawyers, meaning they don't even want him to defend himself properly. The Rwandan government has agreed to allow only one of his seven-member team of lawyers rather, they've only allowed the Rwandan one. They continue to refuse on completely for no legitimate reason, because there are precedents for international lawyers representing people in Rwanda. It's just that they do not want him to defend himself. Not only is he being denied legal representation of his choosing, but he's also being denied his medication. The Belgians,
his health is not great.
Yeah, that's what concerns us the most. He's already told the one lawyer in Rwanda that he feels he may die from a stroke. The Belgian authorities brought his medication to the prison in Kigali, where he is in Mageragere, and the Rwandan authorities have refused to give them his medication, and his hypertension has been consistently high, and he's lost a lot of weight. So he's in legitimate danger, and on top of that, he's 66 years old. There's COVID all over Rwanda, and especially in the prisons. And so we also think that they're not making any efforts to try to help him stay healthy, given the position they have put themselves in with the kidnapping.
Thank you very much. Just one last question, because we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to ask Judy whether she thought that there was any weight to be attached to, recently we've seen the US and the UK governments issuing at the UN some quite forceful statements. These are the two major donors to the government in Kigali, Western donors of foreign aid, in which they've been asking the government in Rwanda to investigate extrajudicial killings, deaths in custody, disappearances, and the use of torture. And this is exactly all these practices are the topic of my book, and also of your book. And I just wondered if you thought this indicates that there may be something going on in terms of Western perceptions of the situation in Rwanda.
Well, I certainly think that Western perception has shifted on Rwanda. It's really an open question as to whether Washington will really undertake a shift in policy. We've seen more critical statements, especially coming at Yoweri Museveni, the president of Uganda, for the violence and the possible vote rigging in that election. But what's important to remember, Michele, is that the Kagame and his Rwandan Defense Forces provides a lot of peacekeepers, a lot of soldiers for the UN missions, peacekeeping missions, and also for the US war on terror, which it wages particularly on the African continent right now. So it's, as far as a geopolitical in terms of their usefulness, Kagame remains a useful ally to the United States as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks very much. I think we have to wrap it up now, but I just wanted to make one more point, which is, oh, sorry, Keir, please.
Can I bring up one thing? I think there's an important detail here that, you know, maybe Judy or Karine could talk about, which is, you know, Kagame has extradited 11 people from the US using proper channels. You know, when he has the evidence, he presents it. He knows how to properly extradite someone from the US who's actually committed a crime. He knows, I mean, he's done it a number of times, but I think what people need to know also is that the number of times he's also killed critics of his regime who are Rwandan. I mean, this is not an isolated incident. I know there was someone in South Africa, and maybe, you know, Karine can speak more to this. There was someone in Uganda. I mean, I don't know how many people, but he's killed
I should
a number of people who've been critics of the regime outside of Rwanda, and Paul falls exactly into that class of people.
Yeah, I should probably speak about this, if you don't mind, Karine, me interrupting, because this is exactly what my book is about. My book starts off with the murder of Patrick Karegeya, who was the head of external intelligence at one stage for 10 years in Rwanda, who was strangled in a South African hotel room. Karegeya's murder is part of a whole panoply of assassinations and disappearances and intimidations and killings that have happened in Africa, but also the network of intimidation and pursuit of anyone who challenges the Kigali, you know, narrative goes further than Africa, and it stretches as far as the States, Canada, Australia, and Europe. So that's my own pet topic. But I'm afraid we probably have to wrap things up. There was one point I just wanted to make, which was that it's very interesting that we have a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting coming up in June. That is usually an event which is a sort of chance for an African government hosting the event. And in this year, it's going to be Rwanda to impress all these international ministers and heads of state who attend. And I think the timing is very interesting, that we've got the Rusesabagina trial coming up. And we have all these statements coming out of the UN by the US and the UK, drawing attention to the human rights record of the Kigali government. So I think there may be changes afoot. So it's a very interesting time. But I'd just like to thank everybody. Sorry to interrupt and cut people off, but we've only been given half an hour. So I just want to say thank you to Judy, thank you to Keir, thank you to Karine. And we're all going to be watching the trial. And thank you, Claude, for introducing us all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And on behalf of ADNA, I want to thank all the audience for following and paying attention to what this esteemed panel has shared. And please keep in mind, Paul Rusesabagina is still under custody in Rwanda illegally, and your voice matters. You can speak up using your resources, your social media, and also reaching out to your members of Congress to push for the immediate release of Paul Rusesabagina and other prisoners of conscience in Rwanda. Also wanted to quickly mention that there are a number of books. One is a book by Paul Rusesabagina called An Ordinary Man that is worth definitely reading. There's Judy Rivers' book, In Praise of Blood, and also the upcoming book by Michaela Wrong, and Judy Rivers on this panel. Michaela Wrong was our moderator. She's got a book, Do Not Disturb, which is coming out on March 31st. Please check out those books so you can get even more information on what we're talking about. Some of us in this talk have actually been targeted or threatened, including Judy River and myself. However, I'd like to thank you, everybody, for your time and your continued support for Paul Rusesabagina and the people of Rwanda.
questions or doubt about why we're having this panel and what is going on and what has been going on, I think they've got some of the answers here. Those who are on the webinar.